Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th devlog update video. The 4th virtual reality devlog update video, featuring footage recorded from the Oculus Rift, which you're watching right now, and the Leap Motion, which is the technology responsible for tracking my hand's movement and then recreating a virtual 3D hand model that allows me to interact with objects in this virtual world I've created. The 3rd update video was the prototype for this, my school project for my extended project qualification. And essentially all this is a collection of minigames. And now in this intro section before the games begin, we have the first tip to keep your palms straight up and straight forwards, which is intended to help the player actually be able to use their hands in a way that they want, because the leap motion isn't particularly accurate. If your hands aren't visibly clear to the camera that's on your face, then it's not going to go particularly well. And secondly, of course, is to not grab things. As you just saw, trying to grab that cup didn't go particularly well, because by closing your hand into a fist, you obscure your fingers, and it makes it harder for the software to track your hand correctly. And finally, have fun and experiment. Hence we arrive at the first test. This is based on a game I played at a friend's house called Schulbacke. I don't know anything about it. I know that Baka means idiot in Japanese, but essentially all it consisted of was just a table which you send discs down. It's kind of like air hockey, I suppose. And that's what I've recreated here. You have targets at the end which score the points that are represented on top of the coloured scoring blocks, and various assortment of discs for you to send flying down the table. Something quite nice and tactile that is unique to VR with hand tracking, because you just couldn't do this type of game without... You can do it with a mouse, you know, the proper flinging discs across the table. The thing that I like about virtual reality with hand and finger tracking is the degree of freedom and control you have, you know? Input is in any way that you can possibly manipulate your hand to make it in. And it works well for this, and especially for the final game in this series. And you can see the scoreboard on the right, 103! I think that's actually a high score for me, funnily enough. And by pressing finish, we move on to the second game, the Mine Layer. This isn't based on anything in particular, it's pretty simple actually, and this is quite the opposite to what I just said about being unique to finger tracking, because this is just a panel that you select panels and lay mines on. There's nothing particularly unique to VR in this game. And I felt like that was an interesting contrast, because although there's nothing stopping you from making this game just for a regular PC or any other sort of device, it's still somehow more immersive in VR, weirdly enough. Just being able to select them with your hands. It's quicker, it's got, I don't know, there's some sort of appeal to just using menus with leap motion or any other sort of hand and finger tracking. Like, you might remember my Sword Art Online GUI VDO, where I just made a menu. And it's so simple, it's just a menu where you select items off of the menu and sub-menus, and yet there was something satisfying about that. Anyway, in this game, the mines, or the mobs, the creeps, the bulls, are randomly generated, in that there's always the same number of them, but their position is random, which channel they will fall down. And so the player has to guess, or try and predict, where these balls will lie, and place mines accordingly, which get used up every time a ball rolls onto them, as you have been watching occur. It's relatively fun. A bit of a disclaimer, these are games that I made relatively quickly, so don't expect them to be the best thing you've ever seen for any sort of VR application. It's really not. It's basically something I threw together pretty quickly for a school project. And I think it serves its purpose, but I'm not saying that they're particularly good games. More demonstrations. Anyway, this one might look familiar. This is pretty much the prototype game, with very, very few subtle modifications. The first modification is that all of the cubes, barring this one, are bigger. I've made them bigger, so that they are easier to attract. If you haven't seen the previous VR devlog videos, you might want to go watch them, because it's interesting seeing how my format and development have progressed, I guess, if you're interested in that type of thing. The second change is that these balls are now blue, and the left button spawns these floating balls, or spheres, rather than those multicolored marbles. And the right button, the red one, is the one that will move us on to the next and final game, as soon as we finish this one. Yeah, funnily enough, I ended up making it so that you don't have to complete each game to move on. I think that works better, because especially in this situation where completing the game is of a different difficulty level for every person, because it really just comes down to how well you work the leap motion input. Like, it's alright if you know how the game works, but if you can't get your hands to move how your hands are actually moving, then whatever you try and do, it's going to be complicated. So rather than insisting that you finish each game, or giving you a certain number of goes at finishing each game, I just decided that the player could move on when they felt like it. And perhaps I should probably also allow them to go back and skip between games, just because it is a collection of mini-games. You know, you can go and choose to play whichever ones you feel like playing. Anyway, here we go, the fourth and final minigame before this video ends. Very, very simple. You've got 3 buttons. One to increase the number of balls being fired at you, one to decrease the number of balls being fired at you, and one to fire the balls at you. And your aim is simply to deflect them, to prevent them... Don't swear, Harvey. How immature. Your aim is to simply prevent the balls from touching the wall behind you, that green panel you may have glimpsed when I turned around to have a look at it. And you choose how many balls will be fired, they fire at you from random position with a discrete random velocity. By that I mean there are several velocity values they could take, and they just choose between them. And there are only those 7 positions they could take, and they just choose between them randomly. So you get this interesting little, not exactly puzzle. I did start off by saying this was going to be a puzzle game. It's more just an exercise. It's like, I don't know, it's just a fun little challenge, I guess. But this is definitely the most fun out of all of them. I mean, the Schulbacher air hockey, whatever you want to call it, disc sliding table thing at the very start is probably the second most fun. But with this, it's just like... It's the opposite of a VR game I played based on Sword Art Online called Bullet Evasion, where you dodge these cubes or spheres being fired at you. With this, you have to actually deliberately put your hands in the way of them, which works most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the spheres can just glitch all the way through your hands, but the majority of the time, it's just a nice little challenge, I suppose. Especially when you overdo it, because there's no limit to how many times you can press that fire button, so you can just keep pressing it, and they will just come at you in a beautiful, hazy stream of multicolored spheres. Quite nice to look at, and very satisfying to play as well. I'm thinking that these types of games are going to be pretty good, and I might try and work on something more. But really, what I want to experiment more with in the future is shooting things from my hands, like Iron Man, repulsors, you know? Stuff like that. And maybe fire. Like, you know how Skyrim was like, yeah, you could independently use a sword in one hand and magic in the other hand, or magic in both hands, or swords in both hands. You really want something like that in VR. Sword fighting in VR. That would be awesome. I just can't make that yet, because this technology, the leap motion, simply isn't accurate enough. And there's other alternatives like Control VR and like the other finger tracking technologies for virtual reality on the market. I just haven't invested in them yet. And besides, most of them aren't even available to the public yet. So to finish off, I'm just going to fire Way too many. Ooh, look at that. Very nice. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little insight into the things that I have been making. I won't be putting this up for download immediately. It's not technically finished, there's a few bugs I want to iron out. You may have noticed how the graphical user interface, or just, you know, the text on objects, actually is always in front. If I were to put my hand over the text, you would see the text in front of my hand, which is just a Unity setting that I haven't quite changed yet. And there's a few other problems with the prototype puzzle previous to this one. But otherwise it's looking pretty good, and I may upload it at some point. Thank you very much for watching, hopefully you've enjoyed, and I will see you next time.